right, so let's get going. The first thing on the agenda is our updates on clinical trials and registries session. Let's see here. So we have a number of things we'll cover. So, you know, one of our hopes for the society is that we're sort of the nerve center for worldwide efforts. So we're going to discuss our explicit efforts, but also efforts of other sort of cooperative efforts of different groups around the world, at least briefly. So it's sort of as a matter of awareness. But we will start with, and we're going to try to adhere to this timetable a little bit. We're a little late starting, so we'll see how it goes. But we'll start with LCH4. Obviously, I'm going to hand it over to Milan to come on up, and I'll just moderate from here to help keep track of time.
Okay, thank you, Mike. So I think LCH4, it is a kind of repetition because we discussed on the first pre-meeting day, but not everybody of you have been there, so I'll try to briefly show this. Just moving. Okay. Okay. So Carlos is also a principal investigator of this study, but he was unable to attend this meeting, so I will report on behalf of him and of the whole group. The data cutoff is quite current, so we collected data until the end of September, so everything I present is very, very current. As you know, for those of you who are new in our auditorium, we started the study almost 10 years ago in Vienna, and then it took time in many countries to go through the authorities, so therefore the start was not that smooth, and just in the last 5 to 6 years we recruit with the full power. This is just to remind you that it is a very ambitious and complex trial. It is not the trials we currently try to do in the pediatric oncology. At that time it was more centered on the patient care to try to solve all the unmet needs and all clinical scenarios. Therefore, we have many stratums, but we have stratum 1. Stratum 1, which is the first-line treatment for all patients with systemic disease. We have two different groups, those with multisystem disease and those who have multifocal bone or special sites, those who have some concerns about late effects in the CNS. Then we have also stratum 2, which is a second-line treatment for non-risk patients. We have stratum 3 and 4. They offered the best treatment at that time because the study started 2012, but we start to prepare the design of the study 2007, 2008. At that time, the mutation, BRAF mutation was still not known. And the best treatment was the non-myeloablative conditioning stem cell transplantation and chemotherapy derived from myeloid protocols, which has been piloted by the French group and has been used in the 2005 salvage trial. And then we have also special stratum for patients with CNS involvement. And we have also observational stratum for the natural history of those patients which we consider do not need systemic treatment to see how many of them at later time point would need treatment. And then there was a follow-up stratum. And as you know, we achieved to have a trial on the, not only the both sides of the ocean, but on 4 continents, 24 countries. And here you see the total accrual with this broad participation. We have almost 2,000 patients, but it is the total numbers. You can here see them by stratum, but those are the initial stratums, so you can initially recruit patients. Stratum 1, group 1 or 2, and stratum 6, the observational, and stratum 5, because the other strata are secondary strata. And here I didn't say, you can see by country the contributions, Italy being the champion. So, stratum 1, group 1, the multisystem disease, it was 2x2 factorial design, testing the value of the continuation treatment in preventing further relapses, because we know that with the SH3 protocol we can cure most of the patients. And here you see the recruitment in this group, 461 patients. This would actually have achieved the target, but this is only recruitment, not the randomizations. You can see the characteristics here. And here you can see the randomizations, which is quite acceptable, 281 randomizations with good randomization rate. Here you can see the randomizations per year, and here we have the first concern that this year we're not that good as we were during the very strict pandemic restrictions. So I don't know what the reason is, but we have to do something here, otherwise this stratum will need 4 to 5 years instead of 1 to 2. And here you can see the distribution by arm, but it is randomized trial, it's to be expected. Once again, you can see the contributions to the different countries. There have been actually there's one death more, but it is not on this slide. Altogether over the years, 5 deaths. And here you see the follow-up information. We still have to do this, the second concern. We still have patients without sufficient follow-up. This is, we have to do the work now in order not to lose patients in addition. So here's the summary of this most important stratum 1, group 1, multisystem disease, that if we do like we did perform like in the last year, we'll need longer time, and it should not happen. We have to try to accomplish this trial in 1 to 2 years. And it would be feasible with the planned recruitments. From the DSMC point of view, there were no concerns about toxicity or other safety issues, so we are allowed to recruit further. Stratum 1, group 2, the multifocal bones, we are happy to announce that we achieved the final numbers. We stopped the randomizations by May 22. So you can use the platform and register patients, but the randomization is no more possible. You can see once again here the total recruitments. Their characteristic here, you have some different scenarios, multifocal bones, CNS lesions, or both. And you can see the distribution. You can see once again the contributions per country. And once again, we have issue with some incomplete data. We have to strengthen and make the last effort to complete them. But here we are done. We're not allowed to disclose data. I don't have it as well. Because we need at least till the next May until all patients have done their treatment. And then I hope that we'll have sufficient follow-up, and next year we can report some real data, not only recruitment. Stratum 2 is the second line for the non-risk patients. We test here both, but mostly we test the value of a prolonged continuation treatment, because you have the feeding patients who repeatedly recur, need not very high and toxic treatment, but prolonged treatment, and we test 2 different regimens. We have here 179 enrolled patients. You see the characteristics here. And we have also very good acceptable randomization rate of 80%, and to have 93 randomized patients. And initially we planned also 400 patients, but we see that due to the later start of some big countries, we couldn't achieve them. We modified for about 4 or 5 years ago the design to phase 2, so we need 100 randomizations. Therefore, until the end of this year, we should be done with this stratum as well. You see here the 93 patients, the distribution, and the contributing countries. So here the randomizations over the years, and they are very, very good. So with those additional 8, we should be done this year. We have also missing information. Here it does not that impressive like in the other ones, but here the numbers are altogether not that impressive. Therefore, we have to strive to accomplish this data as well. So here we hope that to be done, and next year we'll be not able to report data because the treatment duration is almost 2 years. The patients will be still not done. Stratum 3, it was just an effort to offer the best available treatment at that time, very toxic, we know, or very toxic combination. And we plan to have 30 patients like this has been calculated by the statistician of the French group. We have at the moment 19, but here I think for understandable reasons, this stratum stacks. So if you strictly ask, are you going to achieve new knowledge? I don't think so, but in any case, this stratum will be good comparator for whatever high-risk protocols we create for for the future. So I think it makes sense to have it, but I do not expect to have much more included patients. As you can see, the inclusions in the last years are not that good because the treatment physicians and the families maybe decide for the inhibitors for other trials. So this is what I can say. It is sure that inhibitors now undermine this stratum, but I think that we have to handle in the best interest of our patient. And I think it is not a randomized trial. We can let it open and close it then with the closure of the whole trial. And it is the same for stratum 4 because the stem cell transplant obviously is not an option for many of the colleagues. I don't think so that it is completely died for LCH. Maybe you have to rethink the role of the transplantation in the new situation, but it is something to be discussed in the working group here. It will be difficult. Stratum 5 are the patients of great concern, patients with tumoral lesions who have risk for neurodegeneration, and patients who already have neurodegeneration. Some of the patients have already both. And we offered the best treatment at that time, but here we also need new approaches because you know that the treatments we have over the years are not that effective as we expected, and this is the observational arm with the most patients. So I have to thank the DSMC because they do this voluntary in their free time, and also to appreciate the work of all national PIs of all sites for their real efforts making this international trial a success. Thank you. Another time.
Excellent. Thanks for going through that in good time. Do we have any questions for Milan? I have a question. It looks like all the stratums are either completed or really close to completing, except for stratum 1, group 1, right? And that one has like 1 to maybe 5 years to go, right? With falling enrollment. So that's concerning, right? Right? It's strange why it should be falling unless there's some, random glitch at this point, right? Does anybody, do you have a thought, or anybody else have a thought? Maybe our top enrolling countries, if they can comment about, why the enrollment may be dropping off?
We discussed at the pre-meeting. We didn't figure out what is the reason for this drop in the last year. But I think if you did it like the previous 2 years, well done in 2 years. I'm not, the DSMC is also not concerned. 2 years are okay, and then the time you need until you can disclose the data, it is in any, like in any study, so additional 2 years. But we have to complete to achieve the numbers. But yeah. we discussed a little bit, the pandemics could be an explanation, but I don't think
but
so.
But at this point, it should be getting better, right?
Exactly.
Yeah,
that's
right.
what
but because this includes multi-system, maybe risk patients, you think it's just inhibitors? People are not willing to enroll because of the potential, risks of not using inhibitors?
Maybe the people can, I'm not sure that it's not the inhibitors are not really the explanation. We talked about this, but we saw that we did data I haven't shown here. It concerns all the strata, not only those who I expect to have inhibitors, and it concerns all the stratas. Mm-hmm. It is something general, but I don't know, and I have heard from other studies, from other diseases, that it is similar effect either. Yeah. I don't know. Okay. From lymphoma, from leukemia, trials that they have such problems. Yeah. But we couldn't figure out.
So apart from this group, stratum 1, group 1, yeah. Like I said, most of the other arms are just about done.
And those which are registered, we can close them anytime.
Exactly, yeah. So with that in mind, right, so let's just say stratum 1, group 1 closes in a year or two. Is there discussion in the LCH in the steering committee about what's next? Yeah. Have you guys been talking about, for instance, a registry? Because if you're thinking about it, right, you need to be planning at least a year ahead of time. So now's the time to be planning, right, to think about a registry. If the last major arm is going to close, maybe in a year, perhaps, or
we discussed this in the pre-meeting, and we decided to have to comply with our structures, and it is a steering committee which has to decide about the future. But LCH4 study management group can give an input. There was good suggestions by Osama that we have to start reevaluating our response criteria, maybe starting other trials, not only treatment trials, but some radiology and other trials we haven't done over the last 20 years, and you have tools which are not really current. So I think we have very soon to have a meeting and to give an input to the steering committee, and steering committee has to decide how to form a new task force for the future. I think this would be the way.
Right. So it sounds like the steering committee has a lot of work cut out for them, right? Unified consensus response criteria, right? Maybe a registry. Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Thank you, Milan. All right. Good. So we're going to move on to our next on the list is the HLH registry. There you are behind me. Thank you, Kai. So we have Kai up here to update us. And you updated the HLH discussion group, so feel free to, not everybody was there, so this is why we want to make sure it's here as well, but feel free to, abbreviate if you, as appropriate. Yeah.
All right, thank you. So this is the update on the HLH registry. So this is recruitment. The yellow dots, they represent recruitment. And as you can see, it varies between countries. So there is a disbalance between countries and continents. And so in the future, we will be able to compare the data of the HS registry North America with the HS ACID registry Europe and Middle East, I think. So there is one country that is missing, and we are working on it. So this is Ukraine, and we really hope that one day we'll get data from a country in peace and freedom. Right. So I give you some of the data of the interim analysis that we made, and for this we focused on primary HLH, and we focused on countries where the health system allows for all patients to receive all the treatments options that are available, in particular stem cell transplant. So of the approximately 180 patients that were recruited by June 21, we excluded patients that had the final classification of secondary HLH or had undefined classification. We excluded patients that had not yet achieved enough follow-up. We excluded patients that had died before they had received any treatment. So we came up with 115 patients with primary forms of HLH. And for this analysis, we excluded patients where stem cell transplant is not readily available. So it's almost 90 patients that we could evaluate. Keep in mind, it's a prospective registry. It's not a treatment study. So this is the distribution of manifestations. So almost 90% had a systemic HLH. A few had isolated CNS disease, and there were asymptomatic siblings. The distribution of defect is there is almost or more than 2/3 of patients have some form of FHL, and if you include Griscelli syndrome as a classic cytotoxicity defect, in this it's more than 3/4. The median age at onset was 5 months. So the treatment that was administered, most of them received etoposide as first-line treatment, 85%. As you can see here, so you remember it was almost 90 patients with hereditary forms of HLH. There were asymptomatic patients, and there were patients that only received non-major drugs, so mainly patients that only received steroids, for example, in ZIAP deficiency, or patients with later onset and milder forms of FHL. So of these patients that received major drugs, almost 1/3 received additional drugs later during the course of disease. So this included as the most important major drug alemtuzumab. Some received further courses of etoposide after they had already achieved partial or complete remission. But it included as well drugs like anakinra or basiliximab or tocilizumab. So this is the survival curve of FHL and non-FHL, which is Griscelli syndrome, ZIAP, and these conditions, so it's not secondary, right? And the 1 year's overall survival, so including transplant in those patients who were transplanted by then, was 82.6. So this includes as well the patients that were asymptomatic. If you look at the patients that received etoposide as a first-line treatment, there was 74%, remember, including transplant. So this is better than the results from the 94 and 2004 study, where the 5-year overall survival, this is 1 year, was 56 and 61%. But as you can see here, and as you can expect, survival doesn't really drop after 1 year. Survival of asymptomatic patients was 100%, so they are really in a good condition to go into transplant, and this really should encourage us to go further with our efforts to promote newborn screening. The deaths that occurred were 50% before transplant and a 50% after transplant. So you can make the calculations regarding survival to transplant. So if you want more details, you can find them on poster 6 in the poster session room. And there are many people to thank for. And if you have any questions, please go ahead.
Thanks.
Any questions? Okay, great. No, I think that's very clear. Thank you, Kai. Okay, so next on the agenda is maybe can you just advance to slide 1? Is the maybe I should do it. Is the rare histio registry. Since Osama just presented yesterday in the Presidential Symposium the results, we thought that we'd spare you repeat slides, since I think everybody was there. But we did want to give the opportunity to ask any questions of Osama, if there was anybody had any questions about the rare diseases, rare histio registry. So since it's an official society effort, I can start. So as you mentioned yesterday, you're hoping to move towards publication relatively soon. This will be the biggest series so far. You've got to kind of work on getting some more samples to get some central review going. That's fine. Otherwise, what's the plan for continued accrual, and how's that going? Is it up, down, the same? Sort of what's the future?
Before writing a manuscript, what I would like to do is to get all the missing data in place, and what I would like to do also to make an amendment in order to check the mutational status on all patients, because I think in this age, any journal would ask, well, why didn't you sequence these cases? So I would like to be able to do NGS sequencing on all patients. In the end, we may not be able to have 100% because there will be cases that with inadequate samples, there will be cases where you may not find any mutation, but at least we want to do that. So once that is completed, in parallel, we will continue accrual of cases. However, so we may have at least 1 or 2 manuscripts in the end. We just want to point out how to enroll patients. So if you have a patient that you would like to enroll, there are 2 ways. If you think that you're going to have 1 or 2 patients per year, and you think that you have the time to put this study into your IRB, then that's the best way. And we can send you the protocol and then the access to the database. If you already have access to the database and you think that it's too complicated to put the patient's data, just let us know, and we'll be happy to send you the CRF, and our CRA can put in the data in the database for you. But if you have really rare patients, maybe once every 2 or 3 years, and your center would allow telephonic consents, then there is a telephonic consent available, and we can consent your patients through the telephone. However, you still have to help us get in the data and get in the slides sent to the central pathology reviewer. There will be money for any consent translations in any language, for slides processing and shipping. And we're going to try to add also some per case reimbursement as well for new patients. And if you have multiple patients and you don't have the time, you would like to involve one of your young fellows, we'll be happy to accept that, and there will be also co-authors on a future manuscript. So we're trying to make it as easy as possible to enroll patients. The funding that we have will be probably enough for the next 2 to 3 years. And after that, we'll approach the HA again for if they have interest to continue the funding, or if we need to close the registry. But for now, I would like to complete the missing data on these patients, and also make sure that the central pathology review is completed on the almost 47% of the cases where we don't have review.
Mm-hmm. Got it. Okay. So you have funding to do that stuff right now.
We still have funding for the next 2 to 3 years. Yeah.
Okay. Got it. Okay. Any other questions? And then actually one super quick one is, so the accrual rate, is it going up, going down, steady? You know?
It's actually going up.
Yeah. So
it's going up.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
But we're having still lots of missing data. Like people are enrolling, but they're not sending slides to the central pathology review, and we still have lots of incomplete data. So we'd like to finalize all of those details.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Okay, thank you, Osama.
Thanks a lot.
So next up, so those are the society-sponsored efforts. We wanted to also take some time to just talk about what else is going on around the world cooperatively, and in larger sort of multi-center type efforts. So next up on the list is Carl Allen will talk to us about efforts from Nacho.
All right, thank you. I'll try to be quick. Let's see. Okay, so North American Consortium for Histiocytosis, just kind of run through who we are. So this is one of our inaugural meetings in Memphis, and you can see here, Carlos is so committed to this consortium. He got a Bernese mountain dog, one of the only animals that gets histiocytic sarcomas, so he's there in case there's a problem, and his name is Nacho. All right, so this consortium was developed as a response to the St. Baldrick's Foundation consortium grant opportunity. So back in, we applied for this 3 times actually. Bob RCC really was the one who sort of encouraged us to lead this effort, and ultimately we were successful. So we're in our 7th year of funding right now. And we initially had 12 members, and I think really speaking to the huge unmet need of what's obvious to us when you kind of throw a consortium like this out in the real world, we now actually, this number is now 63 members. And we didn't really plan to grow, it's just sort of happening. I think it's because of the St. Jude's team makes it so easy and supports the effort. Institutions from all over the country are reaching out to us to be able to participate. And then we have sort of a structure that looks relatively familiar. So we're relatively organized, SOPs, bylaws, et cetera. Our main structures, we have an executive committee from the original members, then we have a scientific committee, clinical studies committee that oversees the clinical research, and then we also have a DSMC. So we're fully equipped to do clinical trials. And so I just kind of went over this. So in 2014, we had 12 institutions, so now we're actually 65 here. We have 1 completed research study, 1 closed, and 4 actively enrolling. And we have, in addition to St. Baldrick's, we've been able to get some funding from Histiocyte Association, Leukemia Lymphoma Society, and some institutional support, as well as industry support. So LCH4 is sort of the main, is one of the main reasons we initiated this program, because just the regulatory burden and the requirements, national requirements between LCH3 and LCH4 changed so much that we really needed a central team to kind of organize this, and so this was really the main purpose to get started. But since we have the team together, we've been able to launch some other ideas. So LCH-CLO was a study led by Barbara Degar, Carlos, and then Barbara Degar, and we should hopefully have results from this coming. It's been presented here before. We currently have a single-arm phase 2 cobimetinib study that has 4 arms, including I think I'm going to go through it in a second, so I don't need to go through it here, but we have 15 patients enrolled. We published the inhibitor experience study a few years ago. So we have an umbrella biology protocol. That's a bit like the Children's Oncology Group Project Every Child initiative, where people can enroll and then we kind of work to backfill the clinical data and the biology. And patients who are treated on study, this also lets us collect samples prospectively. And then Kim has the Ruxo trial. And in the back row here is the superstars who make this all happen. So you can catch up with them at the coffee break if you have more questions about how this all works. So again, Nacho Kobe, I think the main point is maybe to go through the arms. So we have a pediatric LCH, either relapsed or refractory. It can be high risk or low risk. Neurodegeneration, non-LCH in kids, and then any adult with histiocytosis. And this design, again, things take a while to get started. This design was conceived a few years ago. But the idea is we treat with cobimetinib for a year, then we stop, and then we kind of observe the kinetics of relapse, if there is relapse, in patients who have complete responses. And we're working on an amendment to kind of figure out what's next, and that what's next might be different for these different arms. So again, Nacho Bio is sort of this umbrella biology protocol. You can collect anything. So there's a little bit of overlap here with the, I think with the rare disease initiative, and our hope is that we'll sort of have a virtual sharing opportunity or a real sharing opportunity between these. We collect spit samples for genomic studies, peripheral blood, CSF, tissue biopsies, the usual stuff. So that's Nacho. Maybe just pause for a minute and see if there's any questions about Nacho. Or Sarah can tell us if I got anything wrong or left anything out. Okay. So really it's a platform to try to really build clinical trials. Collaboration is really key to this. We've, I think, had a lot of great collaborations with Matt and Histio UK, as well as some academic collaborations with the more broad Histiocyte Society. All right, Children's Oncology Group, I just wanted to mention, because we're sort of dipping our toe into histiocytosis and COG. So those of you who are pediatric oncologists may be aware of Children's Oncology Group, but this is the major network within the United States. And of course, the mission is to cure everybody who has cancer. And so I just wanted to give some of the details. So it used to be there were 3 or 4 different cooperative groups, and they're all kind of organized through the National Cancer Institute, through this clinical trials network. And they all merged, and it was a little bit of a institutional heartburn for a while, but now we've kind of come up with this one huge institution, which has some advantages, some disadvantages to multiple different networks. But anyway, it's 220 institutions. It's not just the US. We also have Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, I think Ireland as well. There's 8,000 different individual members, and 80 to 90% of the children with cancer in the US are treated on COG institutions, so it really has massive penetration. You can see here, these are all the sites in the US. And then worldwide, I guess we have a few around the world as well. Most of the funding here is federal, so if you get a study through COG, I mean, it can go through different routes, but what's implicit in it is that the government's going to pay for the study. And so these trials take anywhere between $1 and $20 million, more or less, to run. And so it's a really painful, long approval process, but once it gets approved, it has the machinery to make sure that it's successful. And I thought I'd point this out. If you look at all of the different institutions here, why it's important. So for example, the ALCL protocol that we just finished, I think that there were 150 patients or so, and 70 institutions contributed patients. The vast majority in rare diseases are going to be over here. So if you just have sites over here, you can only run certain types of trials. So it's really important to have that penetration. You can see all different types of trials are being run, different funding sources. So for folks in industry, you can have an industry-only sponsored study, and you can kind of basically lease out the CRO capacity of the Children's Oncology Group, which sometimes is an attractive option. And there's also a hybrid approach where you can have like an IIT that's sort of shared between industry and the COG governance. And so this trial took a long, I wrote the first version of this in 2013, I think. And every time it sort of made it through the 1 or 2 year process to get through all the different steps of approvals and committees, the science would sort of outpace the concept. And so we'd finally make it up to the CTEP, which is the NCI final approval, and they'd be like, this isn't relevant, this isn't the best question to ask. And so finally we kind of retreated. Instead of asking sort of a more ambitious question, we said, well, look, let's just get a platform here. And so basically this is a trial that looks identical to Nacho Kobe, except that it's using the Day 101 second generation BRAF inhibitor, which is formerly known as TAC 580. So basically you're going to treat for again, treat for a year, stop, see what happens. And again, I think we anticipate sort of as soon as this gets open, which hopefully will be in 2 or 3 months, we'll start amending. Because we only have to get 32 patients on this. I mean, we should probably be able to accrue in less than a year on this trial. So the idea is really just to get experience in COG. And so this is where these discussions about endpoints and things are going to matter. Because once this gets out there, those, these response criteria, diagnostic criteria, endpoints are going to get kind of baked in. And there's Nacho. Any questions? Yeah, yes.
Thank you so much for the presentation. I have a question for the Day 101 study. Do you limit the treatment duration? And when you take patients off treatment, do you monitor them afterwards for recurrence of disease or sustained responses?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, we're going to treat them for a year and then stop therapy, and then there's there's very close monitoring for the first year off therapy, and then there's so it's like I think every couple months for the first 6 months, and then every 3 months for the second 6 months, and then it goes to annual follow-up, and they're followed for 5 years. With routine follow-up. And I should mention, it'll be kind of interesting that the Firefly study, I think, is being published soon, if it's not already, that used the same compound. And it actually had a higher than expected response rate in low-grade gliomas, and it's a drug that has pretty good brain penetration. So it may be interesting to see the differences between cobimetinib and Day 101 to see if penetration makes a difference. Again, we're not treating neurodegeneration per se as an arm on this trial, but we certainly will be able to have patients with systemic disease and neurodegeneration. And then again, hopefully we'll be able to amend this as soon as it gets open so we can include more broad questions.
Will you be allowed to put them on the drug again after they relapse? Because you can, of course, expect quite a lot of relapses in refractory relapsed LCH, what we know from the literature.
Yeah, so our hope is that by the time we get to our first patient being off therapy, we'll have that kind of baked into the protocol. I mean, right now the drug's not FDA approved for kids, so we won't be able to give it to them off study. So I think we'd have a sort of a consensus treatment plan, but by the time we get to a year, I think we'll have a plan in place. Other questions? All right, well, the main point of these things is to kind of, these initiatives require funding. We've sort of plugged into what funding mechanisms are available in the U.S. Again, I really see this as a platform for continued collaboration with Histiocyte Society as sort of the intellectual hub of all these activities. So thank you very much.
Excellent. Thanks, Carl. All right. So after Nacho and COG, we'll hear about efforts from ECHO. So Milan will come back up. And actually, Milan, while you're walking back up, I just want to say, we have a good virtual audience, and I realize I missed a question from your presentation about LCH4 from the virtual audience. If I could ask you that real quick about LCH4 before we move on to ECHO. Okay. So, and I'm not sure you can answer this, but Antonio Verico asked, multifocal disease with good response after induction, NAD, which continuation therapy will you recommend as randomization is closed? Can you answer that at all?
No, we can't do this because the data is still not open, so I am not aware of which is better. At the moment, we know you can recommend it. At the moment, it is up to the physician's choice.
Yeah, okay, good. I just want to make sure I covered it. I apologize to the virtual audience for missing that previously. But now we'll move on to ECHO. So,
okay.
Advance your slide. You should be
I have prepared some slides for the pre-meeting, therefore I don't think the slide presentation is focused for this audience here. Therefore, I would start addressing two very frequently asked questions. The first is I very often ask, what is ECHO, why we needed it, and is it a competitor to the Histiocyte Society or to Nacho? I can definitely say no, it's not. We see that as a consortium which would be a good partner to Nacho, and we'll act under the umbrella of the Histiocyte Society because our efforts are to have worldwide net on histocytosis. The second question is it the European Nacho? This question is to answer with no. No, it isn't, because we have completely different background. As you have heard, the Nacho started with funding for a purpose, having infrastructure for LCH4, and it evolved to something more, having other studies and so on. ECO started with enthusiasm from the members. It's driven by the need to meet the questions of the multiple languages in Europe, which make it difficult for the parents' organizations to merge and to communicate to each other. We have completely different regulations, and for this purpose, we have to have a structure and a way how to go through together through those process and requirements. And these were the reasons we started. And the organization, maybe this evoked the first questions, because the organization says something like copy-paste the structures of the histio society, but with some modifications. We have also board and so on. But here you can see my first statement, how we see us. We see us together with the parent and patient organizations in Europe. There are about 10 of them as a European histio community, but not a competitor. We're just part of a puzzle. And we have succeeded within a few years with our existence to have covered 26 countries, but there's still some white spots here. And we also, the full members means these physicians who are active in patient care, but from the geographical Europe. It's not European community, it's the geographical Europe. Nevertheless, if they are interested colleagues from other continents, they of course can be associate members. They just cannot vote on the decisions, but they can share everything. And we do. And the corporate members, this means we allow for, in order to ensure continuity, it was a good suggestion and input from the French group that Jean meant different persons can change over the years, but if you have some national groups, we have the continuity. Therefore, I allowed for two types of corporate members: professional groups, like the French working group on histiocytosis, and also parent-patient organizations which can by themselves have their representative, and the representatives of the corporate members can, of course, vote on the steering committee, deciding on the strategy and on the scientific agenda. So this is how many we are. At the moment, you can see we cover pediatric hemoncs, but also biologists, pathologists, and also some adult medicine, some different specialists of internal medicine. And you see if the corporate members till now, I think there are many others will join. It's just a formal process. The mission vision, I already said it, and this is how we started coming together. Johannes Wies, Jean, myself, Cor, and other colleagues just talked at the Histiocytes Meeting in Dublin. Then Johannes organized very soon afterwards a meeting in Cambridge. Unfortunately, he died some years later. He was part of our board, so his contribution was really very instrumental in this process. Then we have some different meetings over the years, but this meeting here is also an important one because Jean organized a scientific meeting in France, but we for the first time invited also, you can see Dora here and other representatives, the parent-patient organizations, and told them that we'd like to work together. And this meeting is also an important one because it was our annual meeting in that, as you can see, 21. It was restrictions. We decided what to do, just to skip the meeting, to have it a virtual one, but to have the hybrid one. 10 of us, mostly local representatives, but also Cor, myself, were there in place. It became nicely organized in a good facility, technical facilities available, and all others joined us from the virtual space. And as you can see, our board meets at monthly calls. We try to move things. I think this works now smoothly. The board set a lot of requirements for a good, productive work. Now we have to involve the audience, have the membership, which is still in kind of dormant stage and waiting for some advices, and to evolve them. And we don't have the COG in Europe, but we have the SIOP Europe branch, which is a very powerful one. We have the ITCC. With their help and collaboration, we're going to start trials. So you can see that this year we have already two meetings with ITCC working on a concept for the high-risk study, and I think we are about to finalize the draft and to start doing it. We are one of the many so-called clinical trial groups within the SIOP Europe. We already delivered to them It's kind of standard clinical practice recommendations. They have been created for different diseases. We deliver this for the LCH, and they have another implementation through initiatives the European community allowing cross-border care for patients from countries with limited resources to come in special situations to experience centers like Paris, Vienna, in Italy, in UK, and so on. UK was at that time still part of the European community when those reference literatures have been created. So the priorities are intensifying this work with South Europe and ITCC, working further on the ECHO website because we're still missing a lot of context. There are two videos there, one explaining and welcoming to ECHO, and the second one explaining in lay terms the LCH, the animated videos, you can see them. And then, we have also what we discussed here on the pre-meeting day for globally. We would like to do this also in Europe to harmonize the vocabulary for databases, the vocabulary for the response assessment in LCH, which should make it simply to have different local databases and to make it possible to merge data and to evaluate data. So some scientific projects are, this paper is by Astrid is just published online, I think. The last some days, we have another one which makes a platform for minimal residual disease evaluation prospectively, which will be implemented in further therapeutic trials. And once again, we're working incorporating, that's more or less the presentation and about ECHO. So I think we're in a good way, but there's still a lot to do. And we don't have we have a little bit funding provided by some national organizations, and we have introduced very tiny membership dues, but it's small symbolic just to see who is really interested in the group and who is ready to work. And one major point is to work very closely to the young IUP group and to attract principal investigators who can move the projects, because the experiences were too senior and too overburdened, and therefore we work very slowly. So we have to change the strategy. But I think it's something we can do globally.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Milan. Any questions for Milan about ECHO? I have a general question. So I know you're sort of touching on this, but I'm still, maybe it's just my unfamiliarity with how things might work in Europe. But if there were a trial, for instance, that we wanted to conduct, say, we meaning the society, or in both Europe and say the U.S., like a parallel matching sort of thing. Is there a mechanism by which ECHO could execute that, or that's pending some future funding that's not yet identified? Is that?
If we succeed to the harmonization of this catalog of variables and how we code the variables.
Right, like assuming it's all agreed. But
so this means
we're
doing it parallel.
Is it
whether
possible?
We can, if we do a study like LCH4 where we are all into this trial, I think it's possible. It is very difficult from the regulatory point of view, and because the mechanism in Europe changed a lot since this year. There is a global registry like the FDA registry you have in the States. We have to apply there. It will make easy afterwards for all other countries. Don't have to repeat it in Europe, but the States have to do it once again. It costs money, so it is something new. Have to see how it works. We still don't have experience with this, but I think both are possible to have in parallel two mirror studies, let us say, and to then evaluate the data. This would have the pretty maybe to have different drugs studying that in the same populations with the same criteria and response studies. It is just a matter of discussion. We have to make a forum how to synchronize our activities. I think that is the issue.
Yeah, okay. All right, great. Okay, anything else?
If you can add to that, one of the problems will be the sponsorship. Because you have to have one sponsor for the whole of Europe, and for some of them I think our center would be willing to do that, but it's also a question of money, and that's difficult. But I think in principle, of course, we want to cooperate, and then we learn quicker.
I can't really comment with guarantees, but there have been some colleagues who told why Vienna not continue with the database to the platform, have the next study on this platform. I think our institution has the commitment to even to be a sponsor for a new drug trial, which costs about 1 to 2 millions. We have this commitment. I have to negotiate if I know that we have the agreement to do this. Regardless, is it an amendment to the SH4, or I think it's better to have a new trials due to these new regulations. I think, but this is really a concern to have a sponsor with this liability. It is not like it was in the past. It's a lot of money, and there are few institutions can afford this.
Okay, great. All right.
Sorry, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Is there any talk about ECHO perhaps contributing to the rare histio registry, or is it just up to each European center independently? Like, is there a possibility to partnership with ECHO to enroll patients? These are rare cases, and we need every case. We need to learn about these rare disorders, especially the malignant histiocytosis.
I can just briefly say that we are not that far, and we haven't discussed it, but the colleague Klassen was responsible one for Germany. There is a strong group on reference pathology in France. We have to discuss it. I think we can make it an eco effort, but each country will have just to submit the patients to your platform, of course.
Yeah,
we have to discuss
instead of having too many registries, if we can enroll all patients into one registry, one big database.
We'll participate in this registry you have already. I think we should contribute to this registry, not to open another one.
Thank you.
Milan here. Just complementary. I mean, could be a platform to disseminate information to all the members and institutions. Although they have to act locally, we can disseminate the information that this registry is open. That's how you can connect.
All right. Okay, thanks, Milan. Can we turn this on? Okay, good. So our time's about up, but I had just a couple extra slides to finish this off. So one of the things that we want to try to do, of course, is be sort of, like I said, histio-central for the world, right? And to help connect and to organize efforts, perhaps, right, around the world. So I just did a few quick searches to see, how many trials are there out there. So if you search on clinicaltrials.gov for either the terms Langerhans or hemophagocytic or histiocytosis, right, you'll find 75, let's see, is this working? Maybe this one. You'll find 75 studies are actually actively enrolling. Now, a number of these are not exactly about histiocytoses, so I don't have time to go through them all, obviously, since I'm at minus 4 minutes. Similarly, if you search in the European database, there are actually 80 trials. Now, you can't filter on whether they're actively enrolling or not, but there are a number of trials going on around the world. But because our colleagues from the Far East are really only, for the most part, limited to virtual participation, I surveyed some of our members to ask them what's going on cooperatively, collaboratively in your countries. And so Taka kindly replied to me and said that in his country, at least in terms of the HLH side of things, you can actually read what he wrote right there, because I'm literally quoting him. But they have a large multi-center study, which it looks like they're hoping to be completing fairly soon in terms of managing sort of mild EBV HLH. And I also emailed Zhao and Rui, who I think at least one of them is on virtually. Zhao pointed out that there are actually only 23 trials that they're involved in with regards to histiocytosis. But most of these are single center that they've been employing. And a lot of it's centered around their DEP regimen, but they're looking at DEP or LDEP with or without anti-PD-1 for HLH. There are a number of other agents, including a BTK inhibitor and ruxolitinib as well, that they're testing for HLH or MAS in various trials. I think most of these trials are actually on clinicaltrials.gov, part of that 75. But they even have a trial of anti-Longerin CAR T cells for refractory LCH, so interesting things. And Rui replied and described about 6 trials, most of which were multi-center trials that they're participating in or have initiated, studying ruxolitinib, emapalumab, sorry, I misspelled emapalumab, I just realized, or some various risk stratifications, I think, coming out of Yongming Tang's laboratory for risk stratifying patients with HLH. There's also ERA-C treatment for LCH going on, centered in Beijing, and an unrelated separate trial in the US. And then, of course, there's also, as people heard about on Sunday, there's emapalumab for MAS trial that's ongoing. And finally, it's not a treatment trial, but we have started a registry in the U.S. To provide a sort of a detailed, much more detailed natural history than we've been able to provide in the past. But I'm not going to dwell on that because we are over time. So we're going to move on